On Christmas Eve in 1945, George and Jenny Sodder were settling in for the night at their home in West Virginia. With 10 children in the house, it was a large, lively family, and the holidays were always the peak of the chaos. The atmosphere that evening was deeply festive. A few of the younger children had begged their mother to let them stay up late, entirely focused on playing with their newly unwrapped toys in the living room. Eventually, the kids went to bed, and the house fell completely silent. Then, at exactly 12:30 a.m., the telephone rang. Jenny got out of bed to answer it, only to be met by a woman's voice she didn't recognize, followed by a sudden, chilling laughter before the line went dead. Assuming it was simply a wrong number, she went back to sleep. But 30 minutes later, she woke up a second time. Her lungs were burning. She rushed into the hallway and saw that her downstairs office was entirely engulfed in flames. George and Jenny scrambled out into the freezing front yard, managing to pull 4 of their children out with them. But 5 of the kids were still trapped in the bedrooms upstairs, completely blocked by a wall of fire and thick smoke. George realized he couldn't push through the flames, so he sprinted to the side of the house, where he always kept a tall extension ladder to reach the second-floor windows. It was gone. In an absolute panic, he ran to his 2 heavy commercial trucks, planning to pull one up to the house. He jumped into the first truck and turned the key. Nothing. He rushed to the second truck and tried again. Even though they had worked perfectly the day before, neither engine would catch. Neighbors had already left to alert the fire department, which was located just 4 miles down the road. But despite the incredibly short distance, the fire trucks did not arrive at the Sodder home for another 7 hours. By the time help finally pulled into the driveway, the house was a smoldering pit of ash. The devastating loss immediately began to show signs of deliberate tampering, trapping the surviving family members in a lifelong nightmare. When authorities finally sifted through the wreckage the next morning, their investigation was remarkably brief. The police and fire officials quickly concluded that the disaster was caused by faulty electrical wiring in the office. As for the 5 children who were trapped upstairs, the official report offered a horrific explanation. They claimed the fire had burned so intensely that it completely incinerated their bodies, leaving absolutely no remains. George and Jenny were utterly broken. Wanting to put their children to rest, they tried to accept the government's word. They filled in the charred basement and planted a memorial garden directly over the ashes. But as the weeks passed, the physical reality of the site gnawed at them. There were no teeth, no bone fragments, and no physical remnants of 5 human beings. The absolute absence of remains meant that for George and Jenny, the case never truly closed. The family's acceptance cracked when they recalled a specific detail from that night. When Jenny first noticed the fire, the downstairs lights were still on. If a catastrophic electrical fault had sparked the blaze, the power should have been the first thing to cut out. Jenny could not let go of the idea that 5 skeletons could vanish into ash, especially since the house itself burned to the ground in under 45 minutes. She needed proof, and she started doing the math. This chart shows the thermal limits of a wood frame house fire. The temperature peaks around 1500 degrees Fahrenheit, which is physically insufficient to vaporize bone. Destroying human bone requires sustained heat over 2000 degrees for 2 hours. To test this, Jenny began collecting animal bones and subjecting them to extreme heat. Even after burning them intensely for far longer than the duration of the house fire, the bones remained largely intact. Beyond the physics of the fire, the house itself yielded more questions. A telephone repairman inspecting the property discovered that the line hadn't been burned. It had been cleanly and deliberately cut with a tool. Then, George's missing heavy ladder was found dumped in an embankment 75 meters away from the house. A local thief was even arrested and admitted to cutting the phone line that night, claiming he was trying to steal a block and tackle. The thermal realities of the fire, combined with the relocated ladder and disabled trucks, eliminated the possibility of an accident. Someone had carefully planned this to ensure the family could not call for help and could not reach the second floor. George Sodder had immigrated from Italy, and in his local community, he was known for fiercely expressing his political views. His outspoken hatred for the fascist regime in his home country had earned him several aggressive enemies in town. A few months prior to the fire, an insurance salesman visited the home. When George declined to buy a policy, the man flew into a rage, warning George that his house would go up in smoke and his children would be destroyed as payback for his remarks. When the authorities closed the investigation, the Sodders uncovered a chilling detail. The very same insurance salesman who threatened their family sat on the coroner's jury that legally ruled the fire a simple accident. The family's suspicion turned to outrage when a local rumor began circulating. It claimed that the fire chief had actually found the children's remains in the ashes, packed them into a box, and secretly buried them at the site to shut the parents up. Unwilling to let this go, the Sodders hired a private investigator who cornered the fire chief. Astonishingly, the chief admitted to burying a box and was forced to guide them back to the property to dig it up. They pulled the box from the earth and opened it. They sent the contents to a funeral director for testing, expecting bone. Instead, the analysis revealed that the box contained a piece of fresh beef liver. The chief had entirely fabricated the finding. The discovery of the meat severed whatever thin thread of trust the family still had in the local authorities. To George and Jenny, this grotesque lie suggested they were facing a coordinated, town-wide cover-up. Operating on the certainty that the fire was a diversion, the Sodders completely shifted their focus. They stopped grieving for victims of an accident and launched an active public crusade to find their kidnapped children. They printed flyers, offered massive cash rewards, and eventually erected a towering billboard right along the local highway. It displayed the faces of their 5 missing children for every passing driver to see, pleading for any piece of information. For over 2 decades, they chased down every lead and rumor without success. Then, 22 years after the fire, an unmarked envelope arrived in the mail, postmarked from Kentucky, but lacking a return address. Inside the envelope was a photograph of a young man in his 20s. On the back, a cryptic handwritten note was signed with the name Louis Sodder. The man in the picture bore an incredibly striking resemblance to their missing son, carrying his exact facial features into adulthood. Reinvigorated, the family immediately hired another private investigator and sent him out to track down the sender of the photograph. He left for Kentucky to find the truth, and he was never seen or heard from again. Every time George and Jenny appeared to reach a breakthrough, the trails simply went cold, swallowed by the same silence that began on Christmas night. George passed away in 1969, and Jenny followed 20 years later. Right up until her final moments, she wore black mourning clothes and tended to the garden over the basement. Both of them died still fiercely believing their children were alive somewhere out in the world. While the perpetrators left behind a trail of sabotaged equipment and broken engines, they succeeded in their primary goal. The children were gone, and the truth of their disappearance was permanently buried under the ashes of the home.